So hi, Gareth here from Virtualized Fruit. Today we're here to talk about the rapid changing of the modern network. I am here with Garry. Would you like to do a bit of an intro to yourself, Garry?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Gareth. Yeah, my name's Garry Owen. I'm responsible for solution product marketing for VMware for our virtual cloud network solution. In other words, the way we bring our portfolio of networking and security products to market.
Great. The modern network is rapidly changing. A lot of businesses are adopting a cloud-first mentality or digital-first transformation. How do you kind of see how everything from a VMware standpoint is fitting in here? Is it the network that comes first, or is it the apps that come first?
Well, that's a really terrific philosophical question to start the conversation. I think. I mean, if I'm honest, I think the industry, the jury's out really in the industry on this, because I mean, it's definitely true that there's rapid change taking place in the network space, and the only question is whether that's driving or enabling a wider change in the marketplace, or whether it's actually being driven by the market, whether there is this need to move towards cloud and to different computing models and different ownership models for endpoint devices and so on and so forth, and whether that is actually putting pressure on the networking industry to transform similarly. I'm not sure we know the answer, and I'm not sure actually for most customers, I'm not sure really they care. I think there's just a big business pressure on them to be able to deliver new products and innovation to market more quickly, and I think they need an infrastructure that can support that. I mean, whether that's as I say, driven by network transformation or driven by a wider digital transformation, I think is a moot point. The reality is it's happening.
Well, again, kind of coming up there, as you said, the industry's changing. Many people know I cut my teeth in virtualization and networking. We're seeing a lot of things go physical to virtual. We saw that in the virtual machine world. We're now seeing that with networking. Point-to-point networking is now becoming not really there. It's kind of a bit of a moot point. And for me, I've got a bit of a security background. So, I can remember days of switches here, switches there, firewall here, firewall there. How do you see the modern networking, in my respect, breaking down these silos? Do you feel that's kind of a fair way of looking at it?
It absolutely is. I mean, I think, I work for VMware, so we wouldn't be able to probably get through a conversation like this without talking about, the influence of virtualization to some extent. But I would say that we're seeing a massive change in terms of the way the modern network is being implemented. And yes, it's many of the things that you're talking about, this fundamental shift from a network just being about point-to-point connectivity, and instead now, because the network has to do a lot more things than it did 25 years ago, it's becoming much more this sort of, I almost describe it as a mesh-like universal fabric that connects everything together. But everything now is not just devices, it's microservices within applications. So we're seeing, that's probably the most current big change that's happening. It's essentially the network becoming a fundamental and integral part of the application. So modern applications are being designed from these sort of often geographically dispersed microservices, and then they have to be linked together to form the application. And that's clearly, I would say, a uniquely new use case really for the network, and it has implications for the way the networks are designed and so on and so forth. I would say also another big change is that not just being about connectivity, you're also seeing the network being used as a sort of a fundamental vehicle, a deliverer of core services to the rest of the infrastructure. So the prime example of that being, as you mentioned earlier, is about security. So it's topics like microsegmentation, which is fundamentally a network subject, but it's also becoming obvious that it's a better way of delivering, if you like, a new security to a world where that's much more hostile in terms of threats than it was 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's in microsegmentation. Try to explain this to people new in the industry and dare I say it, getting towards some of the relics like me now, is that it's just firewall rules at the end of the day. It was just granular ways we could have probably only ever dreamed of doing things, and now we have this great way of just being able to spread that easily and quickly. It kind of takes us on to, as you said, like other things like got east-west security. It's not just north and south. You've now got to start looking at endpoints and what are they doing, and it's more of the looking at the kind of known good things to pick out the bad. How do you kind of feel about that?
Yeah, I think it's quite clear. The traditional security model. I mean, I sort of characterize it as as being akin to an egg. Essentially, you've got this nice hard shell around the outside, and that does actually keep a lot of stuff out. But fundamentally, if you do break through the shell in the egg, you're into this sort of mushy mass inside, and that's fundamentally what the old security model was. It's like make my infrastructure work and then make it secure. And we can't, with the level of threat and the sophistication of threats today, that just isn't good enough anymore. So the old, let's put all our money into the firewall and not worry about anything else, which is really the north-south model of security, just doesn't work anymore, because it doesn't matter how much you spend on your firewall, at some point you will get breached. And the question is, what happens then? If something does get through your firewall and then can propagate east-west within your network, between devices or between applications or between microservices even that actually exist within your network, then you're wasting your money on your firewall. So it's almost this new capability of the network about being able to segment it down to smaller and smaller and smaller subnets, essentially, which is what microsegmentation is, and then making each of those little subnetworks or subsegments effectively making them, isolating them from the rest of the network by having a sort of pseudo firewall around the individual little subnet. Then that's a great way of doing it, because as long as you have a new model of security that says my new model of security is all about being able to detect breaches really quickly and then be able to mitigate the effect, then microsegmentation, is almost the ideal way of implementing that model, because you can essentially isolate, sub-networks within your wider network. You can isolate it even down to application, even down to process level if you really want to. So it's a very, very powerful model, and it just accepts reality. Reality is that there isn't a firewall technology anywhere invented yet that can deal with the level of onslaught that is being thrown at it, essentially, by an increasingly hostile world out there.
But kind of going on to that, again, we've got a lot of people working from home now, and that's the one thing where I think the portfolio kind of comes together is, VMware have come back with a lot of end-to-end stuff. We've got the high-end kind of stuff, as you said, in the data center, all the way to the client-side stuff in recent acquisitions. And it's, as you said, that ability to react quickly when things happen, and really having that kind of single place where you can go and get all this information can be very powerful to administrators. And from that kind of leads me on to how we react, and the importance of automation, orchestration. It's just getting more clever by the day. You've got AI and MI. How do administrators even keep up with this, and kind of what can you guys bring to the table to try and help facilitate the stop of the attacks, and rather spending hundreds upon thousands of pounds on prioritizing what to do?
Well, the reality is you're quite right. Increasingly, the modern computing model, in some ways, is simplifying, but actually, in technical terms, is getting almost exponentially more complex. So, if you have a situation with a sort of modern business where you'd probably have, you would have a local infrastructure of some sort. It's quite probable that you might have some form of private cloud infrastructure within your organization. May, you know, the private cloud being sort of the modern evolution of the data center, really. And then increasingly accessing apps which are outside the organization, SaaS apps, your own apps maybe that are in the public cloud, increasingly melding the two things together. So you have concepts like hybrid cloud, and then you have most of your users, as you say, you know, I mean, this was beginning to be true before the pandemic, but it's definitely true now. Probably most of your users are accessing all of that, this amorphous infrastructure resource, but now from outside a firewall, probably from home or wherever they happen to be working, using who knows what device, could be owned by anybody. It's an incredibly complex environment now, and the ability to be able to manage that in terms of security, in terms of network management, is literally getting to the, you know, managing that complexity is literally getting to the point where it's actually no longer efficient to do it with people. You know, traditional network administrators sitting in front of a bank of screens, manually looking for red lights going over there, and then, you know, probably 20 years ago, what that would mean is when they saw a red light, they'd actually then have to call somebody up who would have to get into a white van with a sheaf of network cables and some routers and you know, and hubs under their arm, and going out to physically make things different. I mean, fortunately, we're sort of probably some way beyond that now, since most people are now implementing at least some degree of virtual network, which means that you at least can do it from a screen and a graphical user interface. But it's still getting to a point where it's so complex that doing that manually is actually error prone, and probably you can't react quickly enough to be able to reconfigure the network or react to a network breach quickly enough to have an effective action. So one of the major advantages about having a virtual network is it's a network in software. And if it's in software, then you can essentially manage it through software as well. So that's where machine learning and artificial intelligence comes in. Essentially, it allows you, firstly, a better standard almost of network management, but more importantly, a faster network management regime as well, which means that you can, you know, ultimately, once you get through all the various layers of abstraction, it means that you can probably deliver better services to your customers more quickly and apply sort of innovation and so on that you just wouldn't be able to do in a manual environment. So it's probably one of the most exciting parts of this entire area at the moment. And we're also seeing, I think there's research by a number of people, Forrester and IDC, that are saying that really throughout the next few years, yes, people are investing hugely in cloud, but interestingly, the most invested area going forward is actually going to be network automation. It's literally putting all of this stuff in place to be able to really exploit the abilities of this new modern network, you know, that looks like, as I say, it's mesh-like and a universal fabric that connects everything, whether you're an IoT sensor right at the edge of a network or a virtual server right in your own private data center. This universal fabric looks the same irrespective of where you are, and it just connects whatever you need to connect into one big amorphous whole.